Let's go to the Spurs.
Okay.
One of DeRozan's former teams. Quiet offseason in terms of what they've actually done.
Mm-hmm.
But got Chris Paul, traded Devontae Graham to clear out some cap space, and then in this sign-and trade with the Kings and the Bulls, they get Harrison Barnes. Also took Stephen Castle from UConn, traded their other pick to the Wolves. The Wolves get Rob Dillingham. So all in all, really just 3 additions to this roster, Wes. And yet I'm still over the moon excited because we get these clips of what Wembanyama is doing in Europe right now. He had 27, 5, and 3 in 19 minutes for France the other day. He's playing point for France. I believe anything is possible with that guy. I believe anything is possible with Wembanyama. So I'm a little torn on their moves in this sense. I love the Chris Paul one.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. I think that is perfect. I think if Chris Paul is willing to be that guy at this point in his NBA life, in his career, I love that they're just going to have Chris Paul running the offense instead of Wembanyama and give them some infrastructure. Even Harrison Barnes, I think, is an infrastructure ad, but we just know exactly what he is, and there's a limit on him. It's fine for the short term. It's a veteran. It's a really good locker room guy by all accounts. But is it aiming as high as I maybe would have dreamed? Probably not. But I think this offseason is them really seeming like they're just creating a veteran baseline for year 2 of Wembanyama. That's what this offseason feels like.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the key word there, infrastructure. And it's the thing they didn't really have last year that they tried to create. They experimented. This was a team that was with no infrastructure last year, right? This was a team that was very abstract, kind of loosey-goosey, very just liquid, where it was like, maybe we have Jeremy Sohan at point guard. Maybe we don't. We're going to try this lineup over here. Zach Collins with Victor Wembanyama? Maybe not. They were just sort of throwing stuff at the wall, Jackson Pollock style, and seeing what sort of happened afterwards. This feels very different. This is, okay, we figured out what Victor Wembanyama is as a rookie, and now we're going to lean into that. And to me, what I've learned from the Spurs this year, and there was all that talk about, hey, Victor Wembanyama is ready to win now, and he wants to win now, and there's pressure and all these things. The Spurs are saying, there's no pressure on us. We have a bazillion draft picks coming up in the next bazillion years, and we're going to be okay. But we've got the guy, and now we're leaning into that guy playing the position that he needs to be at. This offseason is all about creating infrastructure around Victor Wembanyama, specifically for Victor Wembanyama to play center. That's what this is. Chris Paul, Victor Wembanyama, pick and roll. Chris Paul, entry passes to Victor Wembanyama. That's what this is about. Harrison Barnes, a power forward who can play next to Victor Wembanyama and give some backbone defensively to that team and some obviously experience, and I think that's important too. Barnes has won at a high level. Chris Paul has been in the league for a long time, is probably the best mentor in the NBA. All of this is about maximizing Victor Wembanyama at center. That's point number 1.
Yes.
The other thing I learned from the Spurs this year is that they were not in love with this draft. I like Stephon Castle for them quite a bit. They said, you know what? We're going to punt on the 8th pick. If we're going to get a second star next to Victor Wembanyama, we're going to get it in the 2025 draft, where we can have up to 4 first-round picks in a loaded draft class. That's where we're going to get our star. We're not going to rush the process right now. We're not going to go all in on a draft that nobody is very high on. We're going to be patient. We got our guy. We have up to 4 first-round picks next year. We're not trading away that Atlanta pick, which could be a golden ticket for us. We have our own pick, and maybe we'll be good, but we're not going to be that good. We're going to have a few lottery picks potentially here. It makes a lot of sense to me. In terms of what it is that they're doing. We were texting back and forth on our Just Basketball group chat last night, and I was like, the Harrison Barnes thing just sort of feels lame to me because it felt like the Spurs were in position to do more. And then I was looking at it this morning, and I was like, you know what? I get it. I get what they're doing here, and I agree with it.
He's like I'm trying to think of like the right food analogy for him. Like he's like a chicken breast, you know? Like he is solid, he is nutritious, but you really have to like cook it properly and season it correctly to get like the most out of it. And like this is probably he's something.
I don't know.
Just is he like a loaf of, is he peanut butter and jelly?
No, because that could be your meal. Chicken breast is the centerpiece of the plate. He's like mac and cheese to me.
Okay,
It's
that's
like,
good.
yeah, I know what that is. Is it always my first pick? Probably not. But every
Yeah.
once in a while, you could talk me into it.
Yeah. It's good. It's kind of it weighs you down a little bit, but it's
Yeah.
fine and it's good
Hard
sometimes.
ceiling on the mac and cheese experience, right? You're not
Yeah.
going out and doing things afterwards.
No, you need a nap. You need to sleep, and also not the most nutritious thing in the world. Like it's
Yeah, and
fine, it's calories.
We don't know how nutritious Harrison Barnes is to winning basketball. You know?
Yeah.
There's a little empty calorie stuff there with him.
It's empty, and it's like empty calories, and not in the way that we think of empty calories of being like a gunner. It's like empty calories in that like he is the prototypical like 3-and-D, but like is missing like the key ingredients that really elevate him to like an elite 3-and-D guy.
And meanwhile, you've got Victor Wembanyama over here, who's like a defrosting dry aged steak. You're just like that guy. That's everything right there. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. I love the point about them thinking about next year, because if they have up to 4 firsts, and like I think Wembanyama is going to just make them a lot better this year. He is too good for them not to win some more games. 2 things I think that help them though for that draft class. Number 1, well, I'd say 3. Number 1, the lotteries can be chaotic. Like we just don't know anymore. Like the lottery ends up being this thing where like teams are flying around, whatever. Number 2, they're in a much harder conference. I think just because they still have a lot of young guys that are frankly not very good. They have a lot of young guys who haven't worked that are going to need to play minutes for them. I think there's still like a ceiling on this team just because of they're in the harder conference with a lot of unproven guys. And number 3, if they like end up at 6 or 9 or something, they're maybe not going to get Cooper Flagg. I don't think that's where this is going to end up unless they win the lottery and then look out. San Antonio's coming for everyone's necks immediately. But could they get up to 4 by trading like 3 picks for a guy that they love?
They've got a bunch of stuff that they can move, right? And there's 12 teams in the Western Conference actively trying to make the playoffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got whatever. I don't need to name the teams that aren't, but San Antonio is one of those teams.
I mean, so it's like it's really the Jazz, the Spurs, and the Blazers are the teams that aren't.
Right, and so the Spurs are going to try to win more games, but they won 22 games last year. I've heard the argument that is Victor Wembanyama going to be the new Luka Doncic, where the team just gets too good too fast, and you don't really have an opportunity to draft those players. The difference between San Antonio and Dallas is exactly what you just said. They have so many picks. They have so many bites at the apple that they're not going to end up with Cooper Flagg, but they're going to end up with somebody. There's just too many bites at the apple for them not to. And that's sort of the bet here. And they were not in on this draft class, evidently. And they're kind of just going in on the future, but also doing that while creating everything around Victor Wembanyama to make him successful, because they know everything ends up being with them. How many games is this team going to win? I don't know. What's the starting lineup for this team? Chris Paul, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Victor Wembanyama in Penn. And then, I think that 5th starter could be between Keldon Johnson. I guess you could start Castle, maybe, if he's really impressive. I still think they probably bring him off the bench, but maybe you could start him. Jeremy Sohan, they do tend to like him, gives that starting lineup maybe a little bit more versatility, a little bit more ball handling, I guess. But it's still an open question who the 5th starter is. There's stuff I like here. I really like. I'm pretty high on Devin Vassell as a fit with Victor Wembanyama, but I don't know if he's going to be like the championship level number 2. Maybe he's more of a championship level number 3 if he hits his ceiling. But you still need a championship level number 3. I think he's a good fit next to Wemby. But yeah, this is a team that just you don't have to do everything right away. In other words. And this is a team that's just taking right steps, and they've just kind of created the railroad tracks for themselves this summer. That's sort of how I think about them, right? Is let's get the train on the track and let's start moving. But we don't have to get to our destination right away.
Yeah, and I think they still have their non-taxpayer mid-level. I mean, like I don't know exactly like who they'd want to target with that, but there's some. I mean, you could use part of that on someone. You could, like I would call Kennard. I think Kennard might not be a bad fit for them.
They need more shooting.
Yeah, like bringing back even Jetty Osman on like a cheap 1-year deal is not the worst idea in the world to me. He is obviously kind of limited and he's a little erratic
utility
sometimes.
Toolsy guy that can fill minutes somewhere.
Yeah, but he shoots some threes. That's not bad. Like there are names out there that'll be relatively cheap. Like even if you wanted just like a veteran, like good locker room guy, Reggie Bullock would be like fine to me. Like competent player. You don't need to worry about him being a top 8 playoff guy right away. He just needs to be functional for 12 months. And like you could do worse with like $6 million every mid-level. I'm excited for the Spurs. We are going to talk a ton about them. Very excited for Wembanyama at the Olympics. That's going to be like that. That to me is the number one thing I can't wait to see at the Olympics. Is really just that. Like
He
him and
looks
Embiid.
great. I mean,
him and Embiid in a final.
And that's what's sort of fun about the Spurs now too. It's they figured out how they want to play with Victor Wembanyama, and now we all get to just watch it happen.
Yeah.
Right. We get to all just watch it unfold, and they have somebody who could throw him a pass now with Chris Paul, so it's great.
Yeah, Chris Paul throwing him lobs is just going to be the best thing
Chris
anyone
Paul
will watch.
Yelling at the refs in games that don't matter. Because the entire Spurs exist right now just to develop Victor Wembanyama, that part's going to be fun to me.
I mean, Chris Paul and Greg Popovich getting mad at guys and hustling around is going to be sicko shit, and I love it.
It's going to make the difference, though, between winning 30 games and 33 games this season.
Yeah. And if they win 33 games and have the 10th best odds of number one pick, that's a really good place to be. And then a year, and we're doing this same exact kind of structure next summer, Wes, and we think about what else they do. Look, okay, how do they throw fire? How much fire do they need? How much gas do they need to throw in the fire? Like, how much is it time to just dump all of that on there and go for it? I think we get there. I think the other point of comparison with Dallas is that to put it, I think even more of like a fine point on that. Dallas got Luka without like really just it bleeds into the end of the Dirk era a little bit, and then they try to accelerate the Luka era with the Porzingis trade and other stuff. The Spurs almost like it feels like they looked at that and like how like it took Dallas a lot of winding around to get back to getting Kyrie and all these role guys and everything that it took and said we can't do that. We need to build in flexibility so like when the exact right moment is there with the exact right guy, we don't need to shoehorn ourselves into a corner by trading for someone who's like a good player but like a fringe all-star and we're unsure about the fit just because he's available. Like they don't need to do that. They could have been in on other stuff this summer, I think conceivably. They could have been the team that traded for DeJounte Murray. They could have. They could have been a Darius Garland. They could have thrown a crazy offer out for Darius Garland if they wanted to, or pick a wing out there somewhere. But they went Chris Paul, they went Harrison Barnes, and I think that and still have room going forward. And that to me feels super, super intentional.
Yeah, they learned from the Thunder, didn't they? That's what this looks like. The Thunder got SGA, and they said, "Look, we don't need to go out and trade for some superstar player. We're going to keep drafting. We're going to keep drafting. We're going to keep drafting." And boom, we get Jalen Williams. Boom, we get Chet Holmgren. Like, and that's what happens. They got their star. They know it. They are, and that's sort of the greatest luxury the Spurs have is we know who the face of the franchise is, and now we have that. We're not stressed about figuring that out. We know 5-6 years from now, we have a championship ceiling because we have that kind of player. That's the hardest player to find.
Yeah.
Now, like, what are we going to rush this for? He's not ready to win a championship now. Like, what are we doing?
No.
So, like, to me, the Spurs
they could have Houston Rockets this. And that would have been
and I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad that I like what Houston did, but also I don't look at Houston and say, yeah, they've got their championship level star. I like Alperen Sengun. I don't know that he's the best player on a championship team a few years from now. I have no idea. He could develop into that, but I know that that's going to be the case for Victor Wembanyama. So you don't necessarily have to do these things. I think for them, patience is going to be key. Does Stephon Castle ultimately develop into a true kind of point guard? We'll see. I would guess that Victor Wembanyama's running mate, like the number 2 on the Spurs championship team, if that ever happens, is not in the league right now. Not in the league yet. They're going to draft that player over the next few years. And in the meantime, they're going to provide all the things that they need around Victor Wembanyama for him to be as successful as possible. And I think this is a good route. You mentioned like a DeJounte Murray or Darius Garland trade or all these things. I'm glad they didn't do that. The Chris Paul thing to me might be my favorite free agent signing of the offseason because it's that perfect middle ground. He can be that guy for a couple of years, and then you go find that guy later in the draft probably. You don't have to go trade a bunch of stuff for Garland or Murray, who are good players, but probably not the needle movers who you need.